All right, so now that we've implemented the ability to upload a photo or really any kind of a file from the browser to the back end, it only makes sense that we would now enable ourselves to go the opposite direction and grab files from the back end and bring them forth into the browser. And because we focused so far on uploading photos specifically, let's do something kind of cool. So we've got here in the table currently this photo column where we're just showing the name of the photo file that we uploaded. Why don't we change that though to actually show the photo, right? Let's do that. That would be kind of cool. So the first thing I think we should do is just learn a tiny little bit about the HTML that would be needed to show a photo in general. So now let's jump back into our template file and let's find our table. There it is, and there's the photo header, and so here's the photo data cell for each row, right? So let's see what this would kind of look like if we were to embed images in that column, okay? And I think maybe what we'll start off with is I'm going to duplicate that line, and then I will comment out where we started from, okay? Because I think for right now, we won't use this Thymeleaf text attribute, and instead, we will replace the body of this. So right now, I'm just gonna show for illustrative purposes the general type of HTML elements that we have to use to display an image, okay? And this will be a broken image for right now. All right, so what you will use is an image tag, which is just img, like so. And then the image tag has a number of attributes that you can specify, such as source, which is required. And that will refer to a URL or a file, essentially, that represents the image that you want to display, okay? And then there are a couple other attributes that I think might be useful here, specifically the height and the width, because I think we'd want to control how tall and wide these images are within the context of our table. Our table is already pretty well constrained, so even if we uploaded a very large image, we wouldn't want that image to display at full size. So for right now, what I'm thinking is constraining the height and width to something like 30 pixels, and we can just do it this way. And we'll set the width to 30 pixels as 30, I'm sorry, I said 30 pixels, 32 pixels, all right? And if I refresh, let's just see what that does so far. Okay, so we now have these broken images here, but that's really what I wanted to kind of show, was to get a basic idea of what that was going to look like. And I think the 32 by 32 dimension looks decent here. Okay, so now all we have to do is actually figure out how to retrieve those images that we uploaded, wherever there is one available at least. All right, now one more thing I want to do. I'm going to put a dummy source value in here for now. So I'll just say jake.jpg, and let's reload that. Okay, now it's of course going to still be broken. And then let's open up the DevTools in the browser and refresh this page. Okay, so what I wanted to show here is the way that the browser actually deals with images. You might have assumed that when the browser makes its request to the server to retrieve the HTML for the given page, that the images and the HTML and everything all come back in one response, but they actually don't. What actually happens is that first the browser makes a request for the page contents itself, which is generally the HTML, and that's this request right here where it says people, okay? But then after it receives the HTML, which will mostly look like what we have here, except without the Thymeleaf attributes, because those will all have been interpreted on the server side. So once the browser receives the interpreted HTML, it will then scan through it to see if there are any additional resources that it needs to request. And images are one of those types of resources. And so for each unique image source that the browser sees, it will make separate calls to retrieve those resources. And so we actually see right here the browser's attempt to retrieve an image called jake.jpg using the get method, in fact. Now, it received what's called a 404 status code, which means that the file wasn't there on the server because I just made that name up, okay? But my point here is to show that the browser actually will request each unique image of a page, especially if it has never seen those images before. Now, if it has seen those images before and has already previously downloaded them, it will usually, by default, cache those images, which just means to store a copy of those images somewhere on the computer, which is why probably most of you are familiar with clearing your cache, especially like when you're on a website and you think that it's looking a little stale, like you're not seeing the latest version of that site. That may be because your browser is caching some of the resources or some of the information on that page. And so you need to clear the cache to force the browser to update what it's displaying. But in general, the browser will just go out and go retrieve each of those images. And so this means that we need to either put those images somewhere where they can be retrieved by the browser, or, and this is what we're actually going to do, or we need to enable our application to receive those GET requests for the images and then load those images back up and then return them back to the browser. And that's how we're going to do it, because that will actually show you more interesting techniques. So first off, though, I do want to at least just mention very briefly that first approach that we're not going to do, because honestly, it would in many ways be the easier approach. So if I open up my project pane here and just show you the structure of our project, you will recall that we've got this resources folder here, and then under that we've got static and templates. So one thing that we could have done, to be perfectly honest with you, is I could have actually, let's do this. Let me go into the file storage repository here. Okay, so hopefully you recall that we have this storage folder variable here, which is getting injected by Spring with an environment variable called storage folder. And on my computer, I set this folder to correspond to an uploads folder within my own home directory. But I could have set that variable's value to anything, including I could have set it to a location under this static folder. So I could have made an uploads folder here, and then I could have set that environment variable to point to resources static uploads or whatever the full path would have been. And then the application might have tried to upload those files to that folder. Now, I'm just going to tell you right now, if this application had been deployed onto a server in a fairly typical way, that approach probably actually wouldn't have worked for reasons that have to deal with directory mapping and the way that an archived Java application kind of works. So that pretty much would not have worked on a server. I probably could have made it work though here. Okay, so actually that is another reason why we probably shouldn't have done that anyway. But I just wanted to point that out. If we had caused the photos to be uploaded into a folder like this, then it would have been very easy to simply point the source attribute of our image tag right here to something like /uploads/ and then whatever the name of the picture was. And that would have retrieved those pictures very easily, and we wouldn't have had to write any additional code. All right, now having said that, we're not doing it that way. All right, so then how are we going to do this? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to need to come up with a path that will map to another method on our controller. Technically, it doesn't have to be the same controller, by the way. We could map paths to multiple controllers. I'm just doing everything all within the people controller for now. But we will use a special path that will map to a new method on our controller, and that method will respond to GET requests, but it will retrieve images that we are requesting. That's basically it. So let me show you how we can do this. So currently the base path that results in requests being routed to our current people controller is /people, like so. And let me just remind you of how that's working. So in our people controller, we've got at the very top of the controller itself, this request mapping / people. Okay, so that's at the highest level what is telling Spring, hey, if you see any requests come in that start with / people, route them to the people controller class. So that's the first step. Now from there, we will want to introduce a new method that can further handle these requests and differentiate them. Now they're going to be GET requests, right? And so we need these requests to be differentiated from requests that are just trying to get this whole entire page, okay? Because like right here, show people page that returns people currently, that responds to just a general GET request, okay? So obviously we need another method that also handles GET requests, but doesn't map to just /people. We need a little more than /people, okay? So jumping back over here, what I think I would do is maybe say something like /people / images, perhaps, something like that. I think that could make sense. All right, and so then we're going to need to specify the actual file name itself, the file that we're trying to retrieve. And so you already see that up here, we were able to refer to that file name this way, right, using Thymeleaf. However, now here we're doing it by using the Thymeleaf text attribute. But down here in this image, we can't use that text attribute in this way. So what we can do though is that, of course, as with just about everything, Thymeleaf actually has a special source attribute that we can use alternatively to this one here. So we're going to have to modify this just a little bit so that we can use this file name value here. And so the way we can do that is by using a th, as you might have imagined, :source, or src, that stands for source. And then over here, we have to use Thymeleaf's own special way of specifying things, right? And that would be with an @ symbol and then curly brace. And I'm just going to wrap all of this in the curly brace. And you'll see this @ symbol utilized a lot when you're referring to URLs and paths and things of that sort with Thymeleaf. All right, so people / images, and then we can refer to a variable name such as file name, like so. However, now that's not enough because we want to get the person.photo file name, right? So the way that we're going to do that is this, you can think of this variable here as a local variable. And remember, we learned about local variables. Local variables are variables that only have scope or only exist within usually a code block. So if you think of everything that's in between these outer curly braces as a code block, and in fact, in Java, code blocks are typically implemented between two curly braces, right? So you can think of this as a local variable. And so we need to actually initialize this local variable with a value, okay? And that value will be what's up here, person.photo file name. Unfortunately, I do not know of a way that is as concise as what I'm about to show you here, where we could just directly put person.photo file name in here without doing a lot of extra stuff, which wouldn't be as concise. All right, so anyway, next we will put our cursor right after that file name curly brace there, and then put a pair of parentheses. And so within these parentheses, we can define the local variable of file name. And we can simply say file name equals, and then here we can specify what we've got here, right? Person.photo file name. So I will put that right in there, like so. So I'm sorry that that's a tad bit overly complex looking, but that's just how Thymeleaf wants us to do it. And so what'll happen is this value will be interpreted. It will then be stored in a local variable, if you will, called file name, and then file name will get interpreted within the greater context of this string here, okay? Well, now what's one thing that is kind of nice, at least, is that Thymeleaf will interpret the rest of this literally, okay, and then append the value of this file name variable onto the end. So at least that part is kind of nice, I think. All right, so that should take care of that part. So then we need to jump over to our controller and actually make a method that will actually respond to requests that look like this. So we'll jump back over here, and maybe I will just put this new method right underneath the current get method that we have here, this get mapping. All right. So this can be a new public method. Now the return type is going to be unique. Up until now, we've mostly been doing return types of type string, and you know that these handler methods, by default, when they return a string, that string represents the name of the view file that we want to load. So in this case, it would have been people.html is the view file that's going to get loaded up and then kind of returned, right? But in this case, we don't want to return any HTML. We want to return an actual response that references an image, okay? That's what we want to return. And so to do that, which is kind of a special case, I would say, relative to what you would normally be doing within a Spring MVC controller, we're going to specify a different return type. And that return type is response entity. And response entity is a generic type, so we can specify that this is a response for something called a resource, okay? And that's just like a very generic term that means that you could be returning just about anything, really. So to do that, though, we will use our generic indicator there, and then we will simply say resource, like so. Now be careful which resource class you reference. We actually want this one here, the second one, for springframework.core.io, like so. All right, so that'll be our return type. And then we can give this method a name. So we could just generically call it something like get resource. And maybe that's okay for now. And we'll come back and fill in what we're actually going to receive there, but let me just finish this much, okay? All right, so that's the basic scaffolding. And then we might as well go ahead and set up the mapping as well. So this will also be using a get mapping, but obviously we do need to differentiate requests that should be routed to this new method versus the requests that are being routed currently to the show people page. And so we can do that by using parentheses. Now, up until now, we've been differentiating certain requests using parameters. However, in this case, we can actually differentiate by using the path, right? Because as you saw, we are going to the /images path. And so that will allow us to differentiate. So then I'm actually going to specify images, /images, and then another / there. I think actually technically these /, especially the leading one, is optional. Spring is smart enough to know that even if I leave this / out, it will recognize people/images. It understands that. But sometimes out of habit, I may just prefix it with that / there. But Spring is pretty smart about that. Now this trailing / I do actually need because I'm going to specify that I want also to capture the file name that is going to be referenced within this path, okay? So again, jumping back over here, you see that we're going to say /people/images/ and then we're going to specify the file name right there, right? So we need to capture that file name when the incoming request, which will contain that file name, comes into the controller method, okay? We need to capture that. So we can do that with what's called a path variable, okay? And I can name this path variable something. So I'm just going to call it resource, like so. And so now down here in the actual method itself, I need to tell Spring to inject whatever it captured here as a variable down here. And so this should be pretty familiar to how you've seen us do lots of this kind of stuff already, with one exception though. So first, let's go ahead and just set a type. And this can be a string because it'll just be a file name, really. Okay, now I'm gonna just name it resource, okay? However, because I want this value to come from this captured path variable here, I need to help Spring out to know that that's what I wanted to inject here. And so there is an annotation called @path variable, like so. And just like the request parameters, if I don't specify the actual name of the path, then by default, Spring will simply match up this name with that name. However, if I was calling this name here something different, then of course I could come over here and specify what that different path variable name was, okay? So that works pretty much the same as the request parameters. All right, so then once we've got all of that, now we can actually proceed to try to retrieve this file that is being requested. So let's jump over to the, file storage repository, because we're going to need to implement a find type of method now, right? We've got a save method. Now we need a find method, if you will. So let's create that. So this will be public. Now the return type here can still be a resource, because resources from the Spring framework are not web specific. Okay, they are specific to Spring, but they aren't specific to the web. So I'm okay with returning something of type resource here. So we'll return a resource. And again, make sure you're referring to org.springframework.core.io, like so. And I will name this method similarly to how my normal database repository methods would be named. And so I'm going to call this find by name, I suppose. And then it will accept an input of a file name. All right. Now, what do you think I'm going to do here? It's going to be kind of related to what we did up here, really. So we're going to need to build a path again. And in fact, we're going to pretty much use all of this same code. So I'm going to start off by just copying this whole entire line and pasting it down here, like so. And then I will change this to file name, like so. Let's get a little more space here. Now, I certainly could consider refactoring all of this into a method so that I could just reuse that method down here in a more simplistic way. And honestly, for me, I'm kind of on a 50-50 with that. Like, I don't think it would be bad or wrong. The only reason why I might not choose to do that in this particular case at this time is because it would still just be one line of code, right? Now, if it took me 2 or more lines of code, I would almost definitely immediately go ahead and refactor that out. So I'm not saying don't refactor this, by the way. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying in this particular case, it's just one line and it's only a couple of little steps within that line, essentially. So I'm not as bothered by one line of duplication, because in this case, extracting out a method would actually result in more lines than what I've already got here. So I don't know. Not saying don't do it, but just kind of thinking out loud a little bit there. All right, so anyway, there's my path. And then what I can do now is actually pretty straightforward. I can simply return a new URL resource, and that's a Spring Framework class, a new URL resource. And then I can call file path.toURI, okay? Just like that. Now, obviously, I've got the red squigglies again, and you can guess that's going to be because there's an unhandled exception here. There always is, whenever you're dealing with files and resources and things of that sort, there's always going to be potential exceptions that can be thrown from that. So again, for right now, I don't want to fully deal with this in a robust way just yet. So for now, I'm just going to wrap it in a try-catch block like so. Now, because it's possible that these calls could result in this exception, that means my method is kind of ambiguous in terms of what it's capable of returning. And so you may notice that little bitty red there. It's saying that I've got a missing return statement, because if this blows up on line 33, then I won't be returning anything and the method won't be happy. So to make that happy for right now, I'm going to have to still specify an alternative return value. And so the easiest thing I can do for right now is probably just to return a null. Okay. So I will need to come back and address this in a more robust way. So this is not production quality code that you're seeing here at all. Okay. We'll come back and address both of these try-catch scenarios. All right. So there's a way to retrieve our file though. So then we can jump back over here to the controller. And so now we will have the ability to retrieve that file and return it. So now though, how do we actually return it? That's a little bit involved as well. So what we're going to have to do is to build an HTTP response ourselves. It won't have to be super involved, but we will have to specify one header. And now you've seen what these headers look like within the requests. and the responses, right? So we're going to have to build our own response. And in that response, we're going to specify at least one header for ourselves and then the body of that response, which will contain our resource, okay? So we're going to build that. And that's why we're specifying that we're going to return a response entity, because that will allow us to build our own response kind of a little more manually, okay? All right, so the way to do that is to use the response entity class. And then it has a number of methods on it that make this relatively easy to do. And so we can start off with responseentity.OK. Now what this OK does, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on it, but in general, whenever a browser makes a request for a resource to a server, if that resource exists on the server, whether it's HTML or an image, the server will retrieve that resource and then return it. And the first thing it will do is return a status code, okay, which lets the browser know in general what happened with that request. And so if everything is okay, then a status code of 200 will be returned in the response. And so what this really is saying is to build a response with a status code of 200. And there's actually a whole list of these status codes, and you can just Google HTTP status codes. But here are some of those status codes and what they generally mean. So there are some 100s, but here's 200 right here, okay. All right, so that okay directly corresponds to that number 200. So we will start off with building a new response with a status code of 200 or OK. And then we will want to also specify a particular header that we want to have within our response. So I'm going to go down to a new line and I'm going to type header. And now here I can actually specify headers. And so headers are really just key value pairs. So you'll see these patterns used all over the web, okay, and in computing in general, right? You got a key and then a value, all right? And we don't even have to fully memorize exactly what some of these headers need to be. And in our case, we only need to specify just this one. So what we can do if we don't want to memorize this particular header is that we can actually refer to HTTP headers from the Spring Framework. So there's this class here, HTTP headers, under org-spring-framework.http. All right, so HTTP headers dot, and then we're going to specify a header called content disposition. All right. Now I know that sounds like a whole bunch of whatever, right? But you can actually read up on this as well. I will just show you very briefly here. Yeah. So here I am on a really popular reference page on the internet from developer.mozilla.org, and it specifies what kinds of headers can exist in both requests and responses. Okay. And so this is just showing the format of a content disposition header and what it's for. Basically, it allows us to specify that, hey, this response is going to include an attachment, and that attachment's file name is filename.jpg, like in this particular example, okay? And when I say attachment, I mean just like attachments in email. And in fact, when you attach a file to an email, email uses some of these exact same mechanisms. So the people who have basically designed the way that the internet works have tried to be somewhat consistent between how the web works and how email messages work and things of that sort. So a lot of this stuff here is reused across multiple internet technologies, really. All right. So this is really what we're going to be building. Okay. So when we have this this bit right here, header, HTTP headers.content disposition, that is going to result in a line of text within our response that starts off with exactly this bit right here. And then after that, we're going to want to add in something that looks like this, except that file name should be the file name that we are referring to. Okay, that would be the one difference there. So we actually want that output. In fact, I could just copy that right there. Well, actually, hold on. No. We do want that little blank space there also. That's actually important. So we can copy all of that. And what I could do is I could make a string variable, and let's call it dispo, because I don't want to type out disposition, equals. And then, now notice over here, we're going to need to have quotes embedded in this string. And so that I can avoid having to do any ugly escaping of the quotation marks, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make use of a text block like so. And then on a new line all by itself, I'm going to paste this guy just like this, but then I'm going to replace that with a $S. You know where I'm going with this? Okay, so then down here on the header, if I do a Command P, I can see that, okay, the way this works is you specify the header name, which is right there, and then a comma, and then the value. And you actually can use var args to specify multiple values if you want to, but I don't need that. So I'm going to put a comma here, and then I'm going to use the string.format. But to save space, I'm going to leave off the string part and just say format, like this, and then I'm going to statically import the format method, which you don't usually see me do. I usually just type string.format, but I just want to save a little bit of space here. All right, and yes, I'm telling it I want to statically import the string.format method. And so then I can refer to my dispo variable here, comma, and then pass in my resource name. Remember this variable right here? So again, what's going to happen is the browser is going to request a file like jake.jpg. So it'll be /images/ well, actually it'll be /people/images/jake.jpg. That jake.jpg will be captured in this variable, passed into my method here. And so then I can reference that right down here so that this whole little value will just say attachment, blah, 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 file name equals jake.jpg. Okay, so that's what I'm doing with all of that. And then I need to specify what will actually be in the body of this response, right? Because here I'm just building the headers, but I need to build the actual body also. And let me just show you a little bit bigger picture of what this response would look like. So here's a really good example right here. So here's a response. It starts off with the 200 OK. So that's what's going to be rendered as a result of calling the response.entity.OK method, just like that. Then you're going to get your header. Now, the only header that we're specifying here is this content disposition one. At least that's the only one that we are explicitly specifying. Okay, so we're building that header just like that. And then we need to build the body. Now, this blank space here will be included automatically by the response entity when it builds this response. But then we need to supply a body. Now, in this case, the body of this particular example message is HTML. In our case, it's going to be the actual data of the image, the bytes, essentially, of the image file itself. And so now we need to specify that. So I'm going to come down here and then specify body. And to actually get the value out of there, I'm going to refer to the file storage repository.find by name and then pass in yet again a reference to this resource variable, like so. And then I can close that off. And in fact, if I just reformat this a tiny bit, right? So now you can kind of see here, we're going to have the OK, then the header, and then the body. And then over here, you've got the OK, then the headers, and then the body. So that's what we're building here, okay? And then I can simply return all of that, or I could have captured it into a variable and then returned that either way. And let's see, I could also make this variable a constant of the class because this will never change. So I can do an Option Command C, and sure, I will still just call it dispo, enter. All right, and so that moved that out of this method and put it up at the top somewhere. There it is. All right, so it kind of got it out of our way a little bit. There we go. All right, let's see. Let's try this out and see if I forgot something. I may very well have. We'll see. Let's rebuild and reload our classes. In fact, let me open up the little thingy there so I can see that actually happening. Hey. Look at what we've got right there. We've got one actual picture of a person. So that is working. Now the others aren't here because we never actually got their images uploaded, but now I think we may be able to fix that. Let's see what happens if we try to edit some of these. So let's edit Albert Bira. Edit. And let's specify a file for Albert, and we've got one right there. And let's save. Hey, look at that. We've got an image now for Albert. And I think we've got Stefan also, or Stefan. Edit. Come down here. Select the person, Stefan. Yep, we've got Stefan. And then save. Look at that. Oh, I guess Stefan, I don't know. Maybe that was a mistake. Stefan looks like it's a girl. Looks like Stefan is a girl. All right. So, and I don't have the others, but we've got images for these people. So those are all loading up now, right? So it looks like we are in business for this. All right, so maybe in the next lesson, we will go ahead and address those exceptions that I've not been really wanting to address too much up until now. The solution for that is actually pretty easy for the most part. And then we'll also take a look at a few other things that we'll need to do. And then we'll also revisit some of our other CRUD methods for the person class and see if we have to make any alterations to accommodate the images. Because as I think I mentioned 2 lessons ago, what happens if we delete one of these records? Currently, we don't even have a delete method implemented for the images, right? So those would just sit there orphaned essentially, and we probably don't want that to happen. And then also we've got these broken images here, so we can deal with those, but this lesson is long enough as it is, so let's take a look at those issues in the upcoming lessons. So I'll see you there. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this content and you'd like to help me out, there are several ways you could do that. First, you can always click the like and subscribe. That'll help me out a lot. Additionally, another way you can help me out is to check the link in the description below. That'll link you to my website where you can find additional courses. And finally, for those of you who might be interested in starting a new career as a professional software developer, I offer a free PDF guide that will detail exactly how you can get started in this field with no college degree and no prior experience. All you need to do is click on the link in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.